Okay, this is something that I'm pretty certain that the top 20 knuckleheads of YouTube photography have never mentioned, and it's incredibly important. I've got like 1,000 things I'd like to talk about. I've already made 2,000 videos, and there's still like another 1,000 points I'd like to talk about. Now, we all think that, like this, for example, here's an example. Now, this is FX equivalent in crop. Of course, a 56 is still a 56 is still a 56, but this is basically the 85mm equivalent for DX crop sensor. Now, the reason why this lens is f1.2, for example, is since it's a 56 and a 56 is always a 56, doesn't matter if it's FX or DX, they get the same bokeh as an 85mm f1.8, and I've shown test examples and made a video about this, that you have to have a 56 with a much faster aperture. So I have to shoot at f1. 56mm f1.4 basically looks the same as 85mm f1.8 on full frame, the bokeh. Okay, what is so important that nobody's talking about? Everybody's talking about bokeh and depth of field. And it's like, well, I can whip out my 50mm f1.2 and I'll have a depth of field that is just so sharp and so razor thin that you can cut yourself just looking at it. Well, isn't that special? Church lady, right? Why don't you see this stuff on the cover of like Vogue, or you see it in fashion magazines, or you see it in HarperCollins? The reason for that is, even at f2.8, like say an 85mm f1.8, okay, we got nice shallow depth of field, and this is also an important reason why people have long studios. I'm about to tell you why, if you want to do studio photography, you can't just have a studio, but you need to have a long studio. There's a reason for that. You see, when you do have all these magazines that are kind of based a lot on clothing and what the broad is wearing, it's like, well, I can focus in on her eyeball and have like a shallow depth of field like this. It's like, well, isn't that special? This magazine is about selling clothing, and we want that bokeh that you get from f1.8, like an 85mm f1.8 or this 56mm at f1.2. Here, listen closely, because this is important, and really nobody's talking about this. But since this magazine, and this is applicable to basically all portrait photography, you don't have to be a fashion photographer shooting for Calvin Klein or somebody else's dressing. Very, very important in general. We are kind of interested in selling the clothing, so while it's altogether special that you got this much of her face in focus, we want to see the damn dress, or the clothing, or the suit, or whatever the hell it is. And here's the question. Everybody thinks, well, what's a portrait lens? You ask anybody on the street, even a photographer that's been shooting for years. Most of them will say, well, a portrait lens is like an 85mm or 105mm, or like a headshot lens at 135. And that's true, but it's kind of a little bit less than half the truth. Why do you think portrait photographers, especially fashion, most definitely especially fashion photographers, that are taking a picture of so-and-so's clothing line, why are they using 300mm f2.8s? Why are they using 70 to 200mm f2.8s? Either in the studio, this is why you have to have a long studio, because you got to step the hell back. Okay, I'm about to show you an example. This is looking top down. It's the person's head, this is the person's shoulders, okay? Here we have like 200mm 2.8, 300mm 2.8, like a 150mm f2, for example. Looking top down, okay? We have the exact same model over here. Obviously at 85mm 1.4, 85mm 1.8, we don't need to be that far away. That's wonderful. I can't actually show. I've got a shallow depth of field. So what's going to happen? Let me demonstrate what the hell happens if I shoot this model at 85mm f1.4, for example. I am going to make a zone of focus. I'm going to have you look at it. Okay, now here we got the zone of focus. The dress is lost out here and in front. Depends on exactly where you focus. I was like, okay, the eyes and the nose are in focus. We've even got the back of the ears that are out of focus. Like, well, yeah, but I mean, some of the best portrait shots look like that. Yeah, now I want to tell you something about why that, magazines and general really awesome portraiture not only does this some, but it does it very little in general. Now let's take a look at another model. I'm going to have to back way the hell up. I have to have a long studio, or I'm going to have to shoot outdoors with studio lighting. Okay? So now we're going to talk about 200mm f2.8, or let's say 300mm f2.8. People think, well, that's not a portrait lens. That's not a fashion lens. Oh, isn't it? Now, have you ever seen a professional photographer, or ever seen like a HarperCollins or Vogue model shoot? I've seen quite a few, especially living in San Francisco. Man, oh man, there are a lot of photographers out there shooting pictures in the hills of San Francisco all the time. I mean, you'll see them everywhere. They're like cockroaches, taking pictures of new dresses. And the model is way the hell over there, and they're back here with a 300mm f2.8. Well, 300mm 2.8, that's not a portrait lens. Oh, is it? Is it? Here, listen up. Depth of field is not the same thing as subject isolation. Well, sure it is. If I got a shallow depth of field here, I've isolated my subject. And all this crap back here in the background is out of focus. Yeah, well, that's true. And if that's your aesthetic choice, that's perfectly valid. But what if you want subject isolation, where your subject is completely in focus, everything else is out of focus, with a different quality than this, the 85mm f1.8. Now let's take a look at a 200mm f2.8. Like say you're using a 70 to 200 2.8. You're shooting at like 180 on its 70 to 200 2.8. Or you're using a 300mm f2.8. This is also the reason why the 200mm f2 exists. That is an awesome portrait lens. Why? You got to back way the hell up. You know, I don't understand. That's a 200mm. No. Totally valid. You see, that client that is paying you to take pictures of their awesome clothing that are hanging on the hot model, they're kind of interested in all of that clothing to be in focus. And yet they still want that shallow depth of field. Subject isolation. It's like, well, is this subject isolation or is this subject? I mean, I've isolated the subject here. No, this is a shallow depth of field. Both of these are shallow depth of fields, technically, but here we have true subject isolation. Over here, I only have shallow depth of field, but I don't necessarily have the same quality, and I don't have subject isolation. Shallow depth of field, subject isolation. I've got the entire subject in focus, including the clothing that the client is paying you to take pictures of. It's like you can't take an 85mm f1.4 or 85mm. You can't do it. Well, you could back way the hell up and then crop the hell out of the shot. Then you're going to end up with a grainy shot, which is a low megapixel count. That don't work. So why the hell are people bringing 300mm or 2.8 to a fashion shoot? And why do these fashion studios, why are they so long? Yeah, back up. I'm going to throw on a 200mm f2 or a 300mm 2.8, and I'm going to get true subject isolation. Okay, subject isolation, still have a shallow depth of field. You've also got better compression here. The models actually look better. Okay, people think, well, subject compression is only a relative aspect. You know, you can actually yeah, but there are many times that you step back and you get that you can't move. Yeah, when people don't understand that, they talk about a lens compression, and they think, well, it's only relative to position. Yeah, and what's your damn point? What's your damn point? As long as you've isolated the subject and you've shaped their face by using lens compression, I don't care. You know, I've chosen a distance where the bokeh is beautiful, the lens compression for the face of the model is beautiful, and I've got true subject isolation. Yeah. You see, this is why fashion photography and model photography is not taken with a 28mm or a 35mm or a 50mm. It doesn't matter what the hell camera it's on, FX or DX. No on the 50, no on the 35mm. Generally speaking, no on the 60mm too. It starts hitting goodness at about 85, but there's even more goodness for most people and their facial geometry at 150mm, 200mm, 300mm. So, shallow depth of field. It's great. Well, you got her nose in focus and her eyeball in focus, but the rest, your client isn't going to pay you for that, especially if you're being paid to do a shoot of a specific new dress or new outfit. I mean, that doesn't work. You've shown the model's face, and she's gorgeous and all, but no, I want subject isolation. So, You need to get out of your head that, oh, 70 to 200 is a telephoto lens and an 85 millimeter is a portrait lens. Oh, really? Then how come some of the best fashion photographers in the world are out there using a 200 millimeter f2, a 70 to 200 millimeter f2.8? A lot of them are using a 300 millimeter f2.8. Some of them even a 400 millimeter. That's one big ass lens too, and it's a pain in the crotch to use. I've got a 400 millimeter, and that lens will just spank you in the ass. So, subject isolation, shallow depth of field, not to be confused. Okay, thank you for watching. Catch you later. Bye.